Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kelly and I'm going to do my mid-July wrap-up. I took part in Journeyathon, which was hosted by Chatty the Mad Chatter, and I took the magical route. So the first prompt that I fulfilled was for a book that had a mode of transportation on the cover, and so that was Skycircus by Peter Bunzl, and it was a wonderful sequel. It was the third in the series. I loved the adventure. I loved the circus feel. It's about two friends primarily who are connected because of circumstances that they've gone through. The girl has a connection to these cog type creatures, and she herself has a deep connection to the cog works that exist in this world. I would say the only negative about these series is the children do make bad choices that propel them into the story, but they usually overcome things by the end. But I think the imaginative, whimsical nature of these books are absolutely wonderful. So I enjoyed that. So the next prompt I had to fulfill, I was able to do, because the kind of theme around this magical journey was Alice in Wonderland. I read that and I've loved it. So I decided to take a chance to read The Looking Glass, also by Lewis Carroll, sequel to Alice in Wonderland. I did not enjoy this one as much as I do Alice in Wonderland. I love that it does still have some whimsy and zaniness, but it just felt sometimes that Alice was slightly more irritating to me. I don't know why. Maybe it was the mood I was in. And sadly, there is, spoiler alert, no Mad Hatter in this book. So I enjoyed it, but it was definitely not a 4 or a 5-star read for me. I would say it was more in the 3-star category. I don't usually give stars, but it's hard to describe because I did like it, but I just did not love it. I think that everyone needs to read Alice in Wonderland, such a beautiful, magical classic, but this had some of the same feel, but it didn't give me the same feeling, if that makes sense. So the next, and that also satisfied the prompt of a object that transports you into a magical world, or an object that not necessarily transport, but that it has properties. I can't remember exactly how Chatty worded that. I'm sorry. But anyway, I was able to use Through the Looking Glass for that too. And then the last middle grade that I read, that was part of this readathon, but I would have read anyway, was the story of George Mueller. And this was a biography. And I love the biographies that George and Janet Benge put out. I said that wrong. It's not George. It's Geoff and Janet Benge. They are absolutely wonderful. They just take historical figure or a missionary figure and they bring them to life. George Mueller ran orphanages. By the time he died, he had fed over and housed over 10,000 children. And a lot of times the resources were very low, and they just stepped out in faith and waited to see what God would do in these situations to bring homes and food and care to these children. It was an amazing story, and it's one that I will carry with me the rest of my life. All right, so then after I finish that, this is technically a YA, but it is appropriate for a middle grade age reader. This is The Little Mermaid's Voice by Shonna Slayton, and I read this with my daughter, who's 13 years old. And these books that Shonna Slayton writes that are in like the fairy tale world, they always have a historical fiction type element to them. In this situation, we have a mermaid who ends up protecting a prince in the Titanic scenario. So that was kind of interesting. There were historical figures that were throughout the book. As always, a lot of Shonna Slayton's works, the main character, the princess that we are dealing with, does have some annoying qualities of jumping ahead with no thought. Of course, that leads to an interesting story, but after a while, in some ways, it does feel like the same character. I do think they are very good, clean reads for kids, and my daughter and I did enjoy reading this together. All right, next is my absolutely favorite read of the month thus far. And that was The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp. Oh my goodness. This was a suggestion that my friend Dia had for us to buddy read together. And I looked it up and thought it sounded very interesting. And it is such a beautiful book. Now, this book is intended for a Christian audience. We have Mrs. Kipp, who is going into hospice care, and she has a very intriguing background. She's just very blunt, but funny, and just such a wonderful personality. We have a young reporter named Aiden who is really struggling at work. She's struggling with her confidence. She's struggling with how she is relating to the job and the world around her. And she has faith in God, but she's not too confident in how to express that. There is a boss at work who has her best interests in heart, even though she does not realize that. We're dealing with family relationships, but Aiden is learning so much from Mrs. Kipp. And Mrs. Kipp has so much to teach all of us. I was so touched by this story. I enjoyed it so much. It dealt so much with grief and loss. And unlike some Christian books, it wasn't like a formulaic. There were some things that were, like a lot of stories, were a little bit contrived. But this wasn't like some Christian books where it was like formulaic, and then once somebody becomes like a Christian, their life is wonderful, because that is not theologically what the Bible tells us at all. In fact, we are promised that we will have trouble in this world. And so I love that it showed flawed people. It showed people who had not their entire act together. Even Mrs. Kipp, who is someone we really want to look up to because she has so many wonderful qualities. We see that she's not perfect, that sometimes pride gets in her way. All right, the next book that I read was by Mark Lawrence, The Book That Wouldn't Burn. And this is part of Bookish Jim's reading club, the Court of Fables reading club. And she always picks some very good fantasy. This was no exception to the fact that it was very interesting. It's very intriguing. It's about a girl named Elvira, who she's grown up in this dust society, and there are these enemies called the Sabbers, who basically kill her village of people that are in like the dust and barely surviving, kills all the adults, takes the kids. They get rescued, and this is the point where some soldiers come in and take them to the city. We meet one soldier in particular who has the worst potty mouth, and that's why I can't necessarily recommend this book. There were no Lord's name in vain, but he did use the F-bomb several times, and he's supposed to be just a very acidic person, but ends up really caring about this girl Elvira. On the other end, and some other place in this library, that there is a guy named Ever, and he is trapped in the library, and he doesn't really know exactly how he got there. He came through some sort of mechanism, and they don't know why they're there. So Elvira ends up getting to the city, and she gets a job. Eventually, she trains to be a librarian, and she has someone who takes her under his wing. He has a lot of mystery. The library is endless. Nobody knows where it ends. There's so much mystery in the library, and it's very dangerous. So we have Elvira, we have Ever. They're different, very different kind of worlds within this library, and they somehow are able to connect, and that's where the story gets interesting. There's some things that surprise me. There's some things that we think are going to be the mystery of the story that we actually find out what it is, but we get to watch the characters figure it out. So very interesting story. First in a trilogy. I thought it was a standalone when I started it. Yay, another series I started. But so we shall see. I don't recommend it in a lot of ways because there was a character who used bad language, but it was a very interesting book. Okay, that was what I've read so far in the month of July. I hope you're having a great reading month. Leave me in the comments what you're reading. If you wouldn't mind giving me a like and a subscribe, it really helps me out. And read a lot. Bye-bye.